To which the other, of course, exclaimed, "But you will sink the boat and we will both drown." The notion of collective responsibility, appreciating that we are all in the same boat, is a cornerstone of Jewish thought. In a discussion on the ripple effect of each of our individual actions on others, the Talmud teaches, Kol Yisrael aravim zeh bazeh, all of Israel are responsible for each other. Collectively, zeh bazeh, this one in that one, implying that we are all mixed together to form a single entity and thus share a common destiny, what Rabbi Jonathan Sacks refers to as the inescapably interlinked nature of our humanity, the covenant of human solidarity, the thing that makes each of us not only an I, but part of the greater human we. The rabbinic debate around this important teaching is rooted in this week's Torah reading. This week we read the double portion B'har-B'chukotai. The latter imagines two possible paths for the wandering Israelites. If people obey God's will, they will be showered with abundant blessing. If they disobey, they will meet with every form of devastation. The blessings brought by faithfulness to the covenant are magnificent and plentiful peace and prosperity, safety and security, fertility and fruitful land, the divine presence firmly ensconced amid the people. But if they are to act outside of their covenant with God, they will suffer a series of severe curses. Unlike in a parallel text found earlier in the Torah, here it is clear that God is addressing the collective people rather than each individually. The actual verse of Torah cited in that Talmudic discussion in which we find Kol Yisrael aravim zeh bazeh, all of Israel is responsible for each other, comes from the section of curses presented in this week's portion, Parashat B'har-B'chukotai. To this group who recently fled Pharaoh's charioteers at the Sea of Reeds, God warns them that their punishment for sinful behavior will feel as if they are scaredly fleeing an enemy, something surely in their collective memory, causing each of them to stumble over one another as before the sword. The commentators imagine the people foolishly running this way and that in efforts to escape a murderous enemy that doesn't exist. Blinded by their own personal interest and a paralyzing fear, they all stumble in their dissension. The text speaks to a double audience. It addresses both those who stood poised at Sinai all those years ago, and also speaks to us today. If the ongoing coronavirus situation has taught us anything, it is that we are all indeed interconnected. My behavior impacts you and yours impacts me. Not only our negative actions, those that cause harm to you and me, but also our positive behavior too. We all possess free will to choose between the two, to cause harm to ourselves and others, whether inadvertently or not, or to commit to acting in constructive ways. What I think is most troubling for us today, unlike the clear delineation between blessings and curses in this week's Torah portion, is that the choices we must make now in the face of this ongoing public health crisis are not so cut and dry. Our real-life scenario is not an either-or, one set of actions yielding God's blessings and the other curses. Despite what we hear from politicians and pundits steadfast in their respective political camps, the choices we must make are not simple. It's not simply whether to open local business or not, to offer financial support to those who are obviously struggling or not, to open parks, stadiums, and sanctuaries or not. We can't afford to view these decisions with overly simplistic partisan goggles, lest we suffer the same fate that our Torah warns, those who stumble over one another as before the sword. Difficult decisions like these demand we weigh the facts, exploring the nuance and together committing to do what is best for everyone, Kol Yisrael aravim ze bazeh. All of Israel are responsible for each other. Taking accountability in such a way requires each of us to step up, exercising our agency. While in the face of such an overwhelming situation like this one, we need to resist the inclination to passively wait and see, allowing ourselves to become victims of our situation. Rather, Judaism is a faith of action and reminds us that we were each created in God's image to partner with God and each other, for together we are capable of incredible things. I recently heard a story about William Churchill during World War II, perhaps the last time the world was forced to come together to combat an identifiable common enemy in the same way. Commenting on Churchill's leadership, his private secretary, John Martin, described Churchill's genius as his ability to convince constituents that they were protagonists on a vaster scene and champions of a high and invincible cause. Churchill successfully inspired the masses to come together as a unified force committed to a higher calling, a remarkable demonstration of leadership so critical in turbulent times. In response to this powerful story, my teacher, Rabbi Larry Hoffman, recently reflected on Facebook. Here we are today, in a blitzkrieg of disease, bunkered down in the four walls of our respective home fronts, dependent on our own armada of required workers and volunteers, hospital staff, fire, police, ambulance drivers, lettuce pickers, proxy shoppers, and more. They are indeed saving us. A new and American Dunkirk is underway. We all know, however, that the war isn't over. We may be in this for a longer run than we care to imagine. So we wait to hear not just that we will survive, but that the fight is worth it because in the end, we are all protagonists in a vaster scene, champions of a high and invincible cause. I pulled this quote from an open letter Rabbi Hoffman typed to this year's class of newly ordained rabbis and cantors, the future leaders of our Reform movement. Sure, he is writing to a particular group of Jewish leaders, but I offer his words here for all of us, as we are all called upon in this tumultuous time to step up in constructive ways for the common good. We can disagree with one another about specific steps we feel we must take to respond to the many, many troubles we currently face. But we cannot shirk our collective responsibility to our fellow. We cannot ignore what is in our power to help repair. We must act in the best interest of ourselves and everyone else around us, lest we suffer the fate of the cursed, rather than those who enjoy God's bountiful blessings. May our actions merit that coming true. Wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a wonderful, peaceful Shabbat.